There's one thing that civil engineering firm leaders must ensure that they are doing in this hybrid work environment. In this week's episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me Ron Wathen, president at QK, a consulting firm in California. And Ron is going to talk about how keeping the company connected is of the utmost importance right now, and he's going to talk about different ways you can do that, among other things. Before we jump in with Ron, quick word from our sponsor, Big Time.
Oh my God, this is amazing. I love it.
Got it. Wow, Dave, this is amazing. This is really, really cool.
The software is great. I love this program.
These are the real reactions of Big Time customers when they first toured the software. Big Time gives engineering firms the visibility they need to operate more efficiently and maximize profits. From project creation to client payments, Big Time streamlines operations with intuitive budgeting, project management, and invoicing solutions. Schedule your tour of the #1 rated professional services automation software at bigtime.net. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest on to the show today. Ron Wathen is a licensed professional engineer and he's president at QK, a 120-person multidiscipline consulting firm out in California. Ron, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Anthony.
So Ron, let's start off. Tell us a little bit about QK, where you're located, the services you offer, how big you are.
Well, the big news this year is that it's our 50th year. We started out in 1972 as Quad Engineering, and through a series of M&A acquisitions, we've grown to, you mentioned 120. We're actually closer to 150 now, 140. But we are in the middle of California, between LA and San Francisco. We call it the Central Valley. We're located between Bakersfield and Sacramento, and it's a very agricultural driven part of California. They call it the breadbasket of the world. And we do civil engineering, land surveying, city planning, environmental planning, CEQA work, NEPA work, environmental work, biologists, and we have landscape architects and GIS. So we have a range of services that we offer, and we started working with our small city clients many years ago. That was the foundation of the business, but we've expanded our client base to land development, water, wastewater, education, energy. We do a lot of renewable energy permitting and work. And so we work not just with cities, we work with cities, counties, state, federal, special districts. It's a lot, sort of an unincorporated city now in California, where we've had relationships for years. And we're just, we're really just about cultivating good client relationships and keeping those relationships for life. So.
That's great. So let's talk about you a little bit, Ron. Your background as an engineer, and you're now the president of the company. I think a lot of civil engineers aspire to become leaders in their companies. Tell us a little bit about your path and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, I think, I have to start with my upbringing because I grew up in a home with where my dad was in construction, and my mom and dad were just really good people, and they just raised us to work hard and have a lot of resiliency, never give up. So I kind of started with that base, and I think anybody in professional services knows that how hard our job is. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly challenging, and you have a ton of responsibility. So coming in with that responsibility gene, I definitely had that. I think a lot of us engineers and land surveyors, just professionals in general, have a high level of responsibility, which is great. And then, I always liked people, and I loved, the challenge of doing what I do. So I could just always open to new challenges, taking on more responsibilities, whether that was for our team, whether that was for a group or for our clients or for project outcomes. I was always willing to step up and take that on. And not everybody wants to do that, which is fine. Some people want to focus in one area or the other, but I was always ready and able to want to do that. And because I did that, I learned a lot through the School of Hard Knocks. And look at me now. So
there you go. No, it's great to hear you. Well, first of all, one takeaway I take from that is, saying yes to challenges, being open to trying things is an important factor in growing one's career for sure. I think that in the world we live in today, listen, there's a lot of infrastructure work going, there's funding coming, there's lots of opportunities. If you're out there willing to take some of them and run with them, I'm sure you have an opportunity at firms like QK and others for sure. But one thing I like that you mentioned too, that you mentioned your parents, I mean, that makes me feel good. I have 3 kids. And so, reminding myself that the way you raise your kids now certainly has an impact on their career and their lives down the road, right? That's a nice thing to hear about. But, I do think that definitely being open to opportunities and challenges is something that we need to think about in our careers. And let me ask you this question, Ron. What would your staff say is your management style if I asked them?
I think my management style can definitely be situational, but I really do try to be, at least with our staff, more of a servant leader, where I'm supporting. And one thing that I think is really important is to just recognize how hard their job is. They have an incredibly difficult job, and things aren't always going to go perfectly. And so coming in with just a healthy respect and a sense of gratitude for what they need to do and how they need to do it, and help them be successful. So my job is to help them, have the tools they need to be successful. And today, it's not just a single person doing any project, it's a team. So we really focus on being one connected team at QK, that collaboration is really important, that not one of us is as smart as all of us. That's a Mike Knopf, our former president, quote, which I love. And it just reminds us that, it's important to understand our team, our clients, our agency partners. And once you understand where they're at, you have a much better chance of being successful at either completing the project or finding the solution or doing those kinds of things. So I think with our team, it's definitely a servant leader. And then but I like to put some vision. I like people to know where we're really heading. I like people to understand the business case of why we do what we do. People have to understand why we ask people to do things a certain way. And it's generally well received when you take that type of approach.
I like that a lot. I often tell some of the companies that we work with that if you're not clear on where you're headed with your staff, they might feel like they're in a rowboat and they're rowing, but they're in fog because they don't know where they're going, right? And so if you don't know where you're going, you're not as interested, you're not, working as hard maybe because you just don't know what you're working towards. So I do like that approach a lot. And I think in the civil engineering world, I mean, there's a lot of good purpose behind our projects that you can certainly share with your team. You just need to take the time to connect the dots, so to speak. So would you say, Ron, that your background as a civil engineer has helped you to be able to understand the jobs that your team has to do on these projects?
I think, yes. I mean, I think that, going through civil engineering, you get your course load, your workload is super demanding. And you figure out how to, not just survive, but thrive in that type of environment. And I think that when you approach, project, you are looking at what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, what the outcome is, and really understanding what success is for your clients. And then you're trying to weave that in for your agency partners, what their demands and conditions are, and those kinds of challenges. So yeah, I definitely think that being a civil engineer, whether it's a planning project, a bio project, any type of project, the background helps so much. And I had no idea going through college what a great career this was that I was choosing, and how demanding it was and how important it was. So I definitely think civil engineering is just an awesome degree and sets you up for success in life.
Yeah, that's great. And I asked that too, just because I do feel like I really like your philosophy about trying to understand what your team is going through and put yourself in their shoes. And I think the more exposure you've had to those types of jobs in your career and your life definitely makes that easier, and you can really speak their language. And I know not everyone has the ability to do that all the time, and I don't think it's required necessarily per se, but I do think it can be really beneficial. So you mentioned situational awareness sometimes, or you're being a situational leader. Talk a little bit about kind of when you go through a roller coaster ride, which first of all, this last few years has been for everybody, of course, with
Yeah.
COVID and everything else, but also in our industry, you got infrastructure funding, you got work coming like crazy right now. Firms are busy. There's not a lot of people to do the work. How do you as a leader try to stay kind of as even keeled as you can and try not to overreact or underreact per se in different situations, because people are obviously looking at you as for that guidance?
Yeah, I think that is a great question, because one of the biggest things before I became a CEO, that was, one of the things about becoming the president or the leader of your firm is you have to be able to put yourself into a situation without nearly as much information as you're used to working with. As a project engineer or project manager, you may know, a lot about the project. For me, I get brought in to projects or to issues that require my attention a lot of times. Sometimes it's not always because it's a crisis, but a lot of times, something needs, you need to work some things through. And I would just say the biggest thing for me is not to overreact or underreact, but really just try to understand and get as much information as I can. Everyone's going to have perspective on it, and just really understanding the team perspective, where things are at, what's missing, what changes need to be made, and then try to make those changes, get those outcomes to happen. And then I think one of the biggest things as a leader is, let's just say someone did make a mistake, or someone did have something they needed to correct, that you work with them on that, you let them know that's what you need to do, and then you move on. And they need to know you're able to move on and not carry around some type of baggage as a result. That people can then do their best work under those types of circumstances, and that develops a level of trust with your team, and it becomes part of your culture in terms of how you're able to work. So I love that question, because as a leader, you're going to get confronted with those types of situations of reacting, underreacting, overreacting. Neither one of those are good. It's reacting accordingly to the issue and being able to size those issues up, and then make sure they're addressed, and you have accountability with the team that will work favorably in the future.
That's great. I really like that idea of you're kind of creating the atmosphere to help people be successful, right? Because, people can work well under certain conditions. And as a leader, you need to understand what those conditions are. You need to be able to create those conditions. I like to tell people that, like, if I'm working with someone new, when I give them a project, I kind of tell them, like, listen, I'm expecting to get some questions from you in the beginning, right? So that they're not like, oh, geez, I don't want to bother Anthony. I don't want to ask him questions. I don't want to, interrupt him. He's busy. I don't want them to be thinking like that, because I don't want them to slow down or get sidetracked because they're afraid to come to ask someone a question. So I think Ron makes a really good point there, that as a leader, you need to create the atmosphere so that your team can be successful. And it doesn't mean you need to be there all the time for them, but it means you need to, like, just make it work for them and make them feel comfortable. So I really like that approach. That's great. All right. So Ron, let's talk a little bit about technology. Technology is a huge thing in today's world in general, let alone in the world of civil engineering, where there's always like a new software every day that can make projects better, quicker, faster. And so the reason we like to do this show is because we like to get perspectives from leaders in different size companies. Obviously, if you're working at a company that has thousands of employees, you probably got teams of people just focused on tech. But when you're talking about 120, 130, 150 people, at QK, how do you kind of stay on top of technology, make sure that your people have the best tools that they need to succeed?
Well, we have a sizable investment in our technology, whether it's in our survey equipment using drones or UAVs, and or whether it's in our software. If we look back over the last 10 years, our IT or investment in technology is usually between $600,000 and $900,000 every year for a company our size. And for many years, we thought we were overspending, but it has really paid off. Back before the recession, our company grew to above 300 people, and we had a sizable downsizing after that. But because of that, I think we've always been thinking about the need for technology in our firm. Moving to Civil 3D. We used to have a CAD manual. The CAD manual was up on someone's shelf. It was in dust, basically, and everyone kind of had to do their own thing. And now we have CAD standards. It's in the actual software that we use, and it's so much easier to have people doing things the same way. We're 6 offices. We could be 10 offices or 15 offices with the platform that we have. We feel like it's scalable because of that investment. I think that one thing that happened in COVID is people went paperless. So Bluebeam is used for reviews. People used to print everything out and then get their red pen and start to mark things up. Everything's done paperlessly now, not just at QK. I think even our agency partners, but they're probably a little slower to adopt some of that just because of some of the limitations that their organization has in terms of decision making and investment. But our firm definitely believes in it, and we definitely spend a lot of time investing in our training over it. I know just on our project management side, we have invested a lot in our project management training, but we utilize Deltek and have done a lot of work to make that more usable for QK, our organization, and how we run our reports and how we ask our project managers to manage work, and then how we do our resource planning. So people are using that resource planning tool all the time to make sure we can keep our whole company busy and we can see the whole firm, in terms of how we're utilizing our team.
That's great. And a couple of things that I really like about what you said there on, first of all, scalability. I think in terms of, a lot of firms in the civil world are growing fast right now, and there's infrastructure funding coming. They may grow faster. And so to be able to be set up to scale effectively is really important in terms of growing a firm in the civil industry, for sure. The other point that you made, though, I think is an important one to reinforce, is that there are a lot of very fancy, complex, expensive software available. However, if your people don't know how to use them or get the right information out of them, they can be basically pointless. And so we work with a lot of companies on, building PM training programs and things of that nature. And oftentimes when we're interviewing PMs, we ask them about that. How do you track your projects? How do you check for variances? And they're like, well, we got this crazy software, but nobody knows how to use it. We don't know how to get the right information out of it. And so just kind of a message to all of you listening out there that the technology is good as long as it's usable or useful and practical for you, and you can get the information you need out of it. Otherwise, you end up investing and spending a lot of money in something that sounds nice and has a lot of bells and whistles, but it may not be what your project managers and your team really need. So I think that's just a warning to throw out there that I found in working with a lot of companies. We do a lot of growth consulting with some firms in civil world. So that's something to keep in mind. So Ron, obviously over the last few years, COVID, people went virtual. Some companies now are almost back all the way in person. Some companies are still all the way remote. It's really mixed across the country. How does the workplace environment look for you now at QK, and how are you approaching this going forward?
Well, we went virtual basically overnight. I remember March 18th, we sent everybody home in 2020, and March 19th, we all woke up and we're using Microsoft Teams to coordinate. And we had a real sense of connectedness during that time. It was a crisis, and we were all committed to working together. And we found out that we could work remotely and in an environment where we could be effective checking in. We had daily check-ins and those kinds of things. We also know that as the world is coming back to a more in-person world, we are looking at it as there are some people that can do remote hybrid work just fine. But there are others where we feel like there might be some career stunting, especially with younger engineers or professionals. How do they get the FaceTime with clients? How do they get the mentoring from senior engineers? And we know that some of that can happen through the remote environment, which works well. But we also know that we talked about soft skills and we talked about that type of development. It's really hard working from your home to develop those kinds of necessary skills to become what we call a true professional, right? So David Maister wrote this book called True Professionalism, and it talks about becoming a trusted advisor, and it talks about becoming a complete professional, not just great technically, but great on the people skill side, and just caring about your clients, caring about your team members, and that's sort of how they characterize a complete professional. And that's what we want for our team. We want them to develop as a professional and not just as a technical expert. And so, because, think about it, if you've ever been to the doctor, or especially if you've ever had a loved one in the hospital and you're waiting for the doctor to come, that doctor that can sit down and explain what's happening to you as the family, that's really a lot like what we do as professional engineers and land surveyors and the like. If we can come in and help our client really understand what's really happening on a project, or the types of challenges we might have to face, not just now, but down the road in 2 or 3 or 4 steps, those are the professionals that are truly successful in our world.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like, again, you sounds like you're taking a very flexible approach with this and understanding that, yeah, there's a lot of things you could do from home or remote, but there are things you cannot. You need to make sure that you're sensitive to those. I mean, I agree with you from the development standpoint of a person. Those client interactions, attending those meetings are valuable, but at the same time, I think we've all learned that there are things that can be done in the world of engineering remotely that we never thought could be done. So I think in a lot of ways, this whole experience has helped us learn a little bit more about how, civil firms can operate. And I think that it's been a positive experience.
We have employees in 6 states and in areas where we don't have offices, and it's working for us. And we've been able to recruit and retain talent because we're willing to do that. And it's definitely, we're blazing a trail here, I think, Anthony. I think, some clients, they don't want to meet in person. They know you have to get in the car and drive to them, and
You gotta pay
they're fine meeting on Teams or Zoom, and that's great. So it's definitely a new world, and we're trying not to be too hard, take too hard of a line, but also make sure that we're guiding and have a culture that we can build on, and a connectedness with our team.
That's great. And I think that last point that you just made about people in other states where there is no in-office option really speaks to the next question that I wanted to ask you. And of course, there's this new bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is a huge deal, $1 trillion of funding coming through for infrastructure work across the US, which is sorely needed, as we all know. That being said, though, we've already talked about how trying to find enough talent in this industry is difficult to begin with. And now there's more funding, there's going to be more projects, there's going to be more work, and we're going to have a bigger problem. And so it sounds to me like one of the possible solutions to that problem is exactly as you just kind of suggested, is having people that are working remotely. You can expand your workforce, potentially find other people without the limitations of geography. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit and your thought process on that.
I think if you look at our professional, land surveyors, civil engineers, and the great retirement that's happening, we're definitely going to see a shortage in talent and available team members, and so you have to think out of the box. Years ago we were looking at doing, shipping CAD work overseas, for example, at night, and then getting it back. And we did try some test cases there, and just found it to be a little too cumbersome. But we know that we can be successful working with our platform that we talked about in technology. We can be successful with people working all throughout the United States. And as long as we do the things that we always preach, communicate, stay connected, work through problems together, all those things are doable. And I think that many other companies are going to be doing that as well. The days of having everyone in the office, by the way, that wasn't a silver bullet either. There was always things that had to be worked out in office, being in the office. So I think that's definitely something that we've looked at to try to, add. We definitely went through being 50 years old. And one of the hard parts about as you get between 40 and 50 years old as a firm is you keep turning over your market leaders. You keep turning over your management and your leadership. And likewise, your talent, your clients turnover, your agency, key agency partners turnover and change. And so you have to be able to continue to replenish your resources and have that spirit of what built the company, have people take ownership of that and continue that growth and stability.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, change is inevitable, and I think the way that we deal with it is really critical to the growth of our companies, of course. So it sounds like at QK, you're really plugged into your people. You like to talk a lot with them, build that culture the right way. Talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. I mean, it's something right now that's a big thing in our industry. It's something that I think everyone thinks we need to do a better job at, generally speaking, across the industry. But talk about it in terms of how you think about it at QK and how it fits into your growth plan.
Well, it's interesting. I always gravitate towards the inclusion part, but I'll get to diversity too, because that's obviously sort of the first thing everybody thinks of. But I think inclusion in any firm is so important. I think people really need to feel connected, and by giving them a voice, by making sure they know they're valued, that is what is the foundation for inclusion for me. And when people feel disconnected, it's a terrible feeling. If they feel like they're not valued, it's a terrible feeling. And you ask yourself, why am I giving, all of my, this effort and everything if I don't have that? So I think inclusion, I just feel like it's so important, and people can make people feel distanced if they're having a bad day, if they're had a bad, it can be done without even trying, right? It's fragile. So we really need to work on inclusion and making people feel like they're part of a team and giving them a voice. And I think diversity, living in the Central Valley in California, we have a tremendous amount of diversity in our society here. And we love the fact that we have a great level of diversity in our firm. And so what does that mean? That means that, people from all walks of life, from different upbringings, can come together and work together. And that's really the American dream, in my opinion, that everyone has an opportunity to be successful. And we believe in that. I believe in that tremendously, and make sure we do that at QK. We look at it at the team level, making sure we have opportunity for all, and not just in our hiring practices, but as people go through their career, are we giving our existing team the ability to move up in their career, to take on new roles? Sometimes, it's easy for companies to look at someone and go, I just hired you. You're just new. And that was really 3 years ago or 5 years ago. And we forget to give people opportunity. I think opportunity is so important, and diversity should never be, or someone's background or gender or anything should ever be, somehow taking people out of that opportunity. It should only add to opportunity.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think one of the words I think that you've used a few times already, Ron, throughout the interview is connected and connectedness. And I think that diversity and inclusion can help with the idea of being more connected. And I think in the world we live in today, especially where we do a lot of remote work, that connectivity on a team is important. And I think diversity can, drive that and make that more interesting sometimes than it is. And, we have a client I was working with, and I just asked the CEO cut and dry, what's your biggest concern right now? He said similar thing. I got to make sure that we're connected and we're a cohesive unit, even regardless of how or where we're working, or how the team is. So, it's interesting to hear you kind of bring that up a few times. And I do think it's an important aspect of growing the firm today. So I'm going to switch gears here and ask you a couple of questions, Ron, that we usually get from developing civil engineering professionals as they go up through their career. What is the number one trait that you feel is important for civil engineering professionals to have today?
That is a great question. I really think that, you have to look at it on a couple different levels. One is take a look at the people around you and what makes them great. And your goal should be to get to the top of your game, to get to the top of your profession. And there's different career ladders out there for everyone. So you could be a great professional, technical expert, the Yoda of water engineering or transportation or traffic or what have you. We want you to be the best and have that aspiration to be the best. And on the other side is to develop the soft skills that are necessary to be that great communicator, to have that empathy in your communication, to understand where people are at, try to weave that into how you communicate. And so I think that as you come out of engineering or you're new into your career, I had no idea coming out of school what a complete and well-rounded profession that I had chosen, that the demands were going to be to be able to network with people, to be able to work with people, to be able to lead with people, to be develop expertise in my chosen profession, to become a licensed professional, which is really meaningful. I don't know that we stress that enough to our young engineers and professionals, land surveyors, for example, in our firm, planners, biologists, how important that is and what a duty that carries. So just being aware, that awareness is also really important. So I gave you a few things, but the soft skills are really important.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's what I tend to tell people 100 times a day, every day. So I'm on board with you there. All right, next question here. What if a civil engineer asks you, how can I make sure that I'm adding value to my organization? What would you tell them to do?
I would say that in terms of adding value to your organization is understanding the role that you're in and understanding that the role that you might be in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So right now, if they're just starting, their role is probably to be a good project engineer, a good project team player. And they need to understand that they need to have accountability and communication and help that team be successful. And that's typically the immediate role that someone plays when they come out of school, but also understand that 10, 15 years, you're going to be the networker. You're going to be the one getting projects, and you can do that. You can start that process now. You can start by joining ASCE or other outside organizations. You can take on leadership positions, and those are really important, and they pay off down the road in your career. So you've got this immediate need to be a supportive, good engineer, accountable to your team and your project manager, for example, or whatever that situation requires. But then you have long-term goals. And I think that whether it was for me, I signed up for Dale Carnegie because I wanted to create just sort of a better basis of my soft skills, and it really did help, especially early on. I was able to use a lot of the lessons taught in that to my advantage. But I think that people look at what they're doing right now. That's not what you're going to do for the rest of your career. And getting out there, networking, getting out there and having those relationships, guess what? Those relationships are going to be they're going to select the engineers, the teams down the road when they grow into those roles. So whether it's on the agency side or on the private organization, private firm side, that is really important.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's a book out there that's called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." And you reminded me of the title of that book when you were saying, talking to people that are maybe ahead of you down the road to understand what are the skill sets that you're going to need. And that's something that, when we talk to companies a lot, whether we're doing people skills training or project management training, a lot of times they'll say, well, we got this many project managers that need training. My question to them is always, who's going to become a project manager in the next 2 or 3 years? Because they can start benefiting from somebody's soft skills training today. So I think, thinking ahead in your career, constantly upskilling yourself can help you to really make sure that you're going to grow and you're going to be able to give that value to your organization.
Correct.
All right, Ron, what if one of your team members at QK came up to you and said, hey, Ron, what is the one business challenge that if I could solve it for QK would have the biggest impact on the organization today? How would you answer
that? I think the biggest challenge we have is just our team and how we're able to recruit and retain our team. I think the one thing that COVID has brought is a challenge of staying connected, and there's a lot of opportunities out there, and nobody knows how this is going to go in the next 5 years. So will remote work be a fad, a temporary thing, and people will all come back, go, man, we really need to see other people down the road? But I just think that the one thing that we have is just plenty of resources available to do the work. And that the shortage of resources is, I think, what everyone's sort of restrictor for growth is. And so we're out looking for other companies that have similar cultures that might want to partner up with us or become part of our team through an acquisition, and as well as looking for others that are just looking for a great team to join. And that's what we try to offer. So leadership is everything in this world. I think that having great leadership, and not just at the top, but throughout the organization, is really an equalizer, and can make everyone's experience so much more meaningful as they go through their career. Have great leadership, people who really care about each other.
That's great. All right, Ron, I just got a couple of last questions kind of focused around you. I'm always fascinated to ask this question of leaders in the industry. When you come to work every day, how do you decide what you're actually going to work on? I'm imagining you could get pulled in a lot of different directions. How do you figure out what you need to focus on?
I think that long term, we set up a series of focused meetings where we can focus on, we can look at things that need to be looked at, whether that's the management of the company, the financial performance, whether it's a client that we may need to inject some energy into, or it's a project that requires some attention. Checking in with our management team. A couple of years ago, we recognized that we had a very young management team, a young branch management team, and we've created a sort of a practice group of management, which I feel I'm very proud of. They really work together. Sometimes in companies, your management team can be competitive with each other, that's okay to have some of that, but it's not okay to have it to the extent that people don't work together. And our group really does work together. So that we tackle issues on a number of different focus meetings. Right now, we're developing technical leadership across the firm, really identifying groups that set our practices apart to be at the top of our game. And we've done that in the past, but we're doing it in a more focused way. And we're really excited about the results that we're getting. So, it's all about priorities and setting priorities, addressing issues, and but staying focused on the things we need to stay focused on.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you would imagine that someone in your position does have to get involved with things that are, I don't want to say put out fires all the time, but a lot of issues that come up. And so I would imagine that the balance there is trying to make sure you handle those things, but then still focus on the other big priorities that you need to focus on, that you want to be proactive on, and are not just reactive type of issues. And so I could see that as being a big challenge there. All right, I'm going to ask you one more question. I know we've gone a little long here. You mentioned Dale Carnegie. I know Dale Carnegie's got a great book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. You mentioned the course. I tend to listen to the audiobook regularly. It's a great book. Are there any other books, courses, or resources for you in your career that have stood out for you, that you've gone back to, or that have really been kind of monumental in your development that you can think of that you could share with our audience?
We love at QK, we love Strength Finders. Strength Finders is a great book. And if you haven't done it, you sort of go through and you take, there's a book and you read it, but then you go through and you take this exam, and it identifies your 5 strengths. And so people think, oh, you've got these 5 strengths. That's great. Each of those strengths have a partner need. And the partner need is what is really important to understand. What helps you be successful? So we all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. Strengths Finders is about acknowledging each other's strengths. And then as on a personal level, understanding what I need to be successful. The other reason why Strength Finders is so important in our organization at QK is that it helps us understand each other. It helps us recognize the good parts about each other instead of maybe the not so good parts about each other. And so I think that Strength Finders is really consistent with our One Connected Team philosophy. And really, it does, if you really read into it, it's an amazing exploration of what makes us different. And we talked about diversity and inclusion, but what makes us different can make us really strong as a team. And we believe in strengths-based teams. So that's the other side of that makes that book so, I think, workable into our culture and how we operate.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. We use it here at EMI. Everyone's gone through it. We know what each person's strengths are and what we need to work on. And it's very beneficial having that insight around your team so that you can kind of work better together. And so I'm glad you shared that. Well, Ron Wathen, president at QK. Ron, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us here on Civil Engineering CEO. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Anthony. Have a great rest of the day.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ron. I did love how he used the word connected or connectedness so many times. As you grow a consulting firm in this environment, you have to ensure your people are connected. And having conversations and taking actions to ensure that happens can mean all the difference. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please consider subscribing to our channel. Here we put out videos weekly to help engineers become better managers and better leaders. I'll see you next week.